Welcome to our podcast. This is another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego, sponsored by MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com and Barntime Productions at barntimemusic.com, with your host being myself, Steve Wire, a freelance reporter. This podcast is dedicated to healthy dialogue around all things local policy in the North County San Diego area. Join us weekly as we interview political leaders, analysts, professionals, and community members on issues ranging from homelessness to housing density to elections. Well, in today's episode, we bring into the studio John Jesse and Dave Newman. John, over to my right, is the owner of DrGreenrx. It's a licensed marijuana dispensary in Vista. John is a third-generation Californian. He is an advocate for medical cannabis before Prop 215 happened in 1996. And John is very passionate about medical marijuana himself. Now, John also asked me to share that during his life, he also spent some time in state and federal prison for breaking marijuana laws in 1993 and then again in 2005, 2006. And I want to ask you to elaborate on that in a bit. But I wanted to just also mention that John's been a grower himself for 20 years. And again, somebody who's very passionate about the industry, as is Dave. Dave Newman to my left, and his partner Amber owned and operated Soothing Seed Cannabis Nursery for over 10 years, supplying medical patients with verified cannabis clones and cultivation services. He is currently the owner and controlling member of Common Good LLC, a group of local Oceanside community members with the common goal of advancing cannabis regulations in the city and North County, San Diego. Dave is the president of Oceanside for a Safer Community, a political action committee that focuses on advancing cannabis-friendly political candidates. And Dave and Amber spearheaded the efforts to bring cannabis regulations to Oceanside and continue to lobby to bring dispensaries to the city. Now, I'm just curious for viewers and listeners, sort of for the two of you to maybe just briefly mention more about yourselves and your backgrounds and how you two know each other. So John or Dave, want to take it away?
Wow, we go way back. I don't remember how we met, but it's been a while. It's more than likely through the industry.
Yeah.
Back in the day, and still continues today, there's a lot of bad players in the industry, and when you meet one or some that aren't, you hang on to them. You hang on to them for dear life, and John would be one of those.
Yeah, we met through a Soothing Seed, their company before. When I moved back to California after my second time in prison, federal prison, I moved back and I connected with them through their website. And when I was growing for myself, this was about 8 years ago.
How many years?
About eight
years,
almost 9. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, you just go way back. So I want to talk. We're on the heels now of an election. We had last Tuesday, so now we're Monday, so about 6 days out from the election. We had a number of county and city measures passed that you could say are relevant to our conversation today concerning the cannabis industry. Now here in Encinitas, where we're recording, one of the most impactful laws that passed, or it looks like it's about to pass, it's ahead 65% to 35% right now, is Measure L. Measure L is going to increase taxes on retail cannabis businesses in Encinitas by a rate of between 4% and 7%, and raise taxes on non-retail establishments by 1% to 4%. In addition to imposing tax fees on per square foot of canopy area. Now, the city says that this is going to collect close to $1.5 million in revenue for the city. However, not everyone's a fan. I've spoken to a number of experts who feel as though this law actually will discourage legitimate cannabis business at the expense of the black market. And in particular, the 4% to 7% tax proposal has been called counterproductive to the public interest, and that this will most certainly benefit black market sellers who don't face the same kinds of taxes and regulations as the licensed operations. That's one point of view. And the other point of view, of course, is that this is bringing added value and revenue to the city. So for both of you who are in this business, who are in this industry, what are your thoughts on this measure and how this is going to impact our local cannabis industry? You go for it, John.
Well, the taxes, you can't compete with the black market, unfortunately, especially with the ones that are non-pop-up stores. We used to have Prop 215 stores. You know where they're at. But the people that Encinitas is a homegrown town. Lots of people grow marijuana, and they sell it to their neighbors for $100 an ounce. You can't go against that, period. Yeah. I don't care how much you tax it or if you don't tax it at all. Less tax is better to compete with that, but, I mean, again, how do you compete with a $100 ounce? It cost me $200 to put it on my shelf at $400 with 40% taxes. It's not even in the same ballpark.
Sure.
It's completely off a different scale.
Yeah, these taxes are, I mean, it's something else. And it's unfortunate because Prop 64 seemed to set up this system to where not only do you have your state taxes, but the local municipalities get to create their own taxes as well. And it's kind of used in a double fashion. As point number one would be, let's tax this brand new industry and let's see how much money we can make off of it. And point two is, let's tax this industry and make it horrible for businesses that want to come in to play the game. Hence Encinitas. Encinitas City Council was not for legalizing dispensaries or cannabis in any way. So what do? They hire consultants like HDL to come in, who sits down at the table and looks at the city council and the managers and everything else and says, okay, boys, how difficult do you want this to be? And so they say, okay, well, yeah, we want between a 4 and a 7% tax rate. Well, once it gets voted in, what do you think they're going to do? 7%. The canopy tax, it's a ridiculous tax. We've spoken about this before. You can't charge a specific amount per square foot of canopy. What if I have a catastrophic failure in my crop? I'm not getting that money back. You've taxed me for X amount of square feet. I've paid you. I got root aphids or whatever the case may be, and so now that crop's out the window. I'm not getting my money back. So it's just a form of a kind of fleecing a brand new industry that you probably don't want to begin with, and so this is one way of making it irresistible or unavailable to many people who want into the industry. They make it horrible. So nobody wants. So here, hence the black market. And now it's going to thrive.
Yeah, Dave, do you personally oppose a cannabis tax period in principle, or do you think that there's a right way to do it?
I do. They're the right way of doing that if you're going to do one at all. I mean, I'm not sure what other industry gets taxed to this amount or this level. But if you're going to tax cultivators, it's got to be on dry weight. You can't, because then it's a finished product, it's ready to go to market, versus something that you're still in the middle of processing and growing. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Sure. John, do you have any thoughts on that or agree?
The taxes are, especially for cultivation, I mean, you could buy an $80 pound, it still has $150 in taxes on it. And that's just the flat tax. That's not even talking about the canopy, that's just the tax per pound. Yeah. Which is ridiculous. You're a farmer, you're making $80 a pound, you're going to pay the government $150 for that $80? That doesn't make any sense at all.
Sure.
It's not logical at all.
I think, by the way, there's a stat worth noting here, which is that people who are listening to this may just be thinking of the taxes at the local level, but we're also have to factor in state taxes, right? Like we also have to factor in the fact that, license holders in California are subject to a state cultivation tax of $161 per pound and a 15% excise tax, which doesn't include county taxes as well. So I think it's important to note in the context of this conversation that we're not just talking about the local taxes, we're talking about the cumulative impact of repeated taxation measures on these businesses and how this affects viability. Now, one interesting conversation that I had with Amber before the show, Dave, was just the sort of question of what a fair tax looks like. And she was sort of making the point that it's not that we want special treatment. We just want to be taxed similar to other similar industries. And I don't know if either of you have an opinion on what that would look like and sort of what a fair tax would look like at the local level.
Well, just to throw it out there, I mean, I owned a bar on Oceanside Boulevard for a few years. We didn't have a special tax, yet alcohol kills 88,000 people per year. The mortality rate of cannabis is what, still 0 at this point? Again, after years of putting people in jail for cannabis, now you want them to pay for everything.
Sure.
I mean, it's just, and on top of that, again, it's more of a discouragement thing in most cases because they just simply don't want it. So the black market will continue to thrive.
Sure. And that kind of leads me to this broader question, which I brought up before we started recording, which is when we talk about the black market and we talk about sort of these mom and pop dispensaries that are trying to survive in this climate of ours, in California specifically, versus the larger, more consolidated entities. Do either of you have an opinion on how state laws and current state tax structures sort of reflect this consolidation of the business versus promoting mom and pop stores and the viability of those local models? Like what is the cumulative impact of these measures?
Just real quick, I mean, I looked for a place in Encinitas, and most of the buildings had 3 to 5 renters in them for 2 years. There's no way. And the big players can float that $10,000 a month for 3 years to get that license. I can't.
Yeah.
And even having felonies, I don't, actually, I can't participate in that because I make more than $18,000 a year. So even those special programs, they get somebody that's not even in the industry and they put it in their name so they can qualify for this program.
Sure.
So, how do you rent a place for $10,000 a month for 3 years? But that's 300 something thousand. It's almost 400. That's almost $500,000. It's not even possible. I couldn't even find a place, and I started looking a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, the industry is kicking mom and pop out. Prop 64 pretty much put a nail in that coffin. When we voted for Prop 64, we were supposed to. There was a section in there that allowed the small mom and pop growers a 5-year head start above the larger corporations. So you couldn't have you were limited to 1 acres of cultivation sites. Well, it was voted in. Unfortunately, everybody missed Section 10, which was called amendments. Amendments allowed legislation to make changes to a voter initiative. I don't think that's ever happened in the state of California. A voter initiative can only be changed via another voter initiative. Well, in this case, they put in an amendment that removed that requirement. So what happened? 1 year later, legislation comes in and says, you know what, that 1 acre limitation, we're going to remove that. So there goes mom, pa, and here comes big corporate. So, I mean, this is designed to basically wipe out the small grower. And you're seeing that in Northern California right now. The smaller grower is struggling. They're going out of business. They can't handle all the regulations. They don't have the time or the money to deal with learning all of these new regulations, to where large corporations go hire somebody to learn them and handle it for them. Sure. So you're seeing a lot of those issues.
Do you what are the tangible effects on the industry of monopolization? Like if someone's listening to this and saying, okay, why is the consolidation that we're seeing, why is that a bad thing for the industry and a bad thing for consumers?
Well, it's going to be a bad thing for the industry. Again, it's because we have a lot of legacy growers who aren't going to make it into aren't going to make the long run. You're going to see a lot of the Walmarts coming into play, and the Walmarts don't really care too much about quality. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to have those legacy growers providing the strains and the quality that we all know of today. And I think you're going to just start seeing a lot of that. I mean, Walmart doesn't really care too much about its customers. They're in this for the volume, and that's what we're more than likely going to start seeing more of in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, John.
It's already a race to the bottom. Cannabis is about half, at least 30 to 40% cheaper, most of the brands, than it was a year and a half ago. I mean, they're competing like crazy. That's where I get the 40% when I say up to 40% taxes, is because every time it travels through somewhere, there's a tax. So gross receipts, 8% at the San Diego level. So if I buy something from distribution out of San Diego, there's 8% tax. Then there's the Vista tax. Then there's the excise tax. It could be taxed 5, 6, 7 times easily, depending on where it moves and what channels. So it's definitely a solid, up to about 40% easily.
Sure. So I want to take a step back and look at another kind of relevant law here. So in 2020, Encinitas voters approved Measure H. It's a citizens' initiative that allowed cannabis retail sales, cultivation, et cetera, subject to certain regulations. In the case of retail sales, 4 business licenses were issued via a lottery, which happened at the end of last month, and those winners were just recently declared. Now, Dave, when I believe I reached out to you sort of off the record about this subject, you had some opinions about this lottery process and about its effects on sort of in relation to the larger context of the monopolization of the industry. And I kind of wanted to give you a space to talk about this. Do you feel as though Measure H and the process that we're seeing underway in Encinitas now was a step forward or backward for the industry in Encinitas?
Well, Measure H was obviously a voter initiative. If there was a lottery system held, unlike Vista, it would have been in the voter initiative. So it would have been a requirement. To where Vista, their Measure Z did not allow for a lottery, yet they held it anyway. Of course, the lawsuits start stacking up, and everybody's getting ready to file their lawsuits, but they hit the lottery, so all the lawsuits went away. Unfortunately, the person, Rodney, who spent the money and the effort to make Measure Z happen, didn't win the lottery. So Rodney got shown the door, basically, and everybody else was able to come in and set up shop based on Rodney's efforts and money. And at that point, Rodney had gone back at this about 2 or 3 times. So it cost him a small fortune. He just simply didn't have the money to fight back. But yeah, Vista went ahead and initiated a lottery in violation of the voter initiative. Encinitas obviously didn't do that. They had the clause in there that it was going to be a minimum of 4 dispensaries, and of course that's what they went with, because again, Encinitas council people didn't want legal dispensaries, so they're just doing whatever they can at this point to make it as hard as possible. But yeah, I mean, if a lottery system was available to them, then they have every right to do it. They got over 200 applications for 4 dispensaries. That's pretty interesting, to say the least. A little disheartening, considering 99.9% of those were applicants who didn't live in Encinitas and has no ties to Encinitas. That's another issue we're seeing, is a lot of people coming into cities to set up shop that have no a community involvement in that city or any involvement at all. So, they set up shop, they run their business, but they don't really do anything to help the community when all is said and done.
What about you, John? What do you think are going to be the impacts of this process on Encinitas as far as the
only the big players can get in there? Yeah. I mean, if you look at the 200 applicants, multiples are big companies that hold multiple licenses already. If I could have found the spot, it still would have cost me $200,000-300,000 just to pay the rent on it. I couldn't find a spot because they were already tied up. Because the people in the background who wrote this initiative, they're part of the people that got the licenses. That's the way it works.
And that's another thing. You had 200 applicants. Yeah. They needed to have an address ready to go. So there was a lot of landlords very happy for a few months. It is what it is. But I mean, it's that type of thing that really just makes it very unsavory.
You mean as far as these sort of backroom deals that affect
consolidation? Like I say, if you have 200 applicants, those 200 applicants have to have an address that is within the setback requirements, 1,000 feet from schools, daycares, parks, beaches, air, you name it. So obviously they have to pay rent through that whole time, whether their application or they're waiting for the lottery or whatever the case may be. And then once they lose, well, now they're stuck in a lease in many cases, I would imagine. So they're going to be paying for that just for no reason at all for quite some time until their lease is up, or they bail out of the lease and pay what they can and call it a day. So a lot of landlords got a lot of money for pretty much nothing. This process with Measure H also, because it was a lottery and you couldn't be within 1,000 feet of another dispensary. If an applicant's lottery came up, it would now disqualify anybody within that 1,000 feet. So they automatically got removed right off the bat. So this is kind of one of the problems with the lottery system, is that just because you're in it and you made the lottery and that guy won, you're out. Even though there's 3 more licenses available.
Sure. So John, assuming that you agree with Dave's perspective on the faults of the lottery system, what do you think is a better way moving forward? What can city leaders, local leaders learn from this in terms of how to distribute this power, this licensing power on companies in a way that's more equitable, that's more fair moving forward?
They need to vet the applicants better, because I guarantee, and I haven't seen who the 4 are because I'm not on the running, but they're going to be 2 or 3 of the big names we already know that own multiple companies. I mean, even if it's under a different LLC, it's still the same people with the same money.
Right.
When you have 10 stores, you have a lot of money to throw around. Yeah. They're the only ones that can get into it. Vista, like Dave said, did a lottery. I stood in line for 14 days, rain and shine, and it rained twice that week, those 2 weeks. And I was number 5 or 6. And the 2 days before they made it a lottery, I was number 23. Rodney was 32 or 33. And that's all the people that came in to actually apply for these 11 licenses in Vista. everybody caught wind of it, obviously, with Encinitas. Because the same player is obviously now, 200 licenses for 200 applications for 4 is crazy. We only had 33. It was a third chance, basically.
Now
And it needs local people, like Dave said, that live in the community. Do you want Joe Blow taking the money out of this community and taking it down the street to wherever they live up in whoever knows where? Or do you want someone that lives in the community, that cares about the community, running these businesses? Right. And that's what you want.
And that's kind of where Oceanside sort of got it right. Even though Oceanside still doesn't allow dispensaries, we were able to get some regulations for manufacturing, a couple of delivery services, cultivation, and lab testing and distribution. Now, their system was you go through the application process, and your application is scored. A lot of the scoring comes down to how much are you involved with the community. Have you ever had businesses in Oceanside? And with those types of things, you get a better score. Sure. So it seems like more of a reasonable way of finding the proper applicants.
Sure.
I agree with Dave, too, on the scoring,
Yeah,
for sure. Because one of those things is local business owner. I grew up in Vista. I moved there in 1983. I was 11 years old. So I've got a lot of roots in that community.
So it seems as though what I'm hearing from both of you is that there's sort of this intransience on the part of local leaders when it comes to actually progressing the industry forward. Like they're kind of saying one thing, like, yes, like, this is happening, we accept this, that, this is evolving in our communities. But on the other hand, they pretty much are doing everything that they can to slow down the growth of the local industry, of these smaller mom and pop places. And I'm curious to see, like, in your views, like, what do you think's behind that sort of hesitancy, that sort of like, we'll say one thing but do another thing? Like, how does that what do you think, that's like a political motivation? Like, where do you think this is coming from, and how does that affect the industry's evolution in California?
Well, I don't think it's I don't think it's to say one thing and do another thing. Let's take Oceanside again, for example. Our mayor, Esther Sanchez, she wasn't mayor at the time. She was running for mayor, but she's always been a no vote with anything related to cannabis. And then when it had passed, or they'd put in regulations, well, now it came time to propose a tax. And she signed on to, when you put a tax or a measurement on the ballot, or anything on the ballot, really, you have an argument for and an argument against. And she signed the argument for. And one of the bullet points on that was that we need this tax to basically make it as inconvenient as possible for anyone to want to come and do this type of business in the city. And, I called her out for it, and, she kind of denied it and did what she can. But, it was right there in black and white. So again, she was never for it, and now she's doing whatever she can to make it difficult. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure. Again, I don't see much of a, okay, well, we have to do this, so I'm going to make it horrible. Right here, although you have Tony Kranz here in Encinitas, and he was we didn't want it, I don't want it, I don't like it, but it got voted for, so now we have to deal with it. So how can I make it horrible? Yeah, it's really what it comes down to.
Sure. John?
The city of Vista didn't want this. There was illegal, what they call Prop 215 shops up there for years. And they didn't want it, and all of a sudden they got $4 or $5 million, and now they're very happy with us. So, and again, just because they're taxing it, and it's taxed way too high. 7% is way too much. And we were medical for a long time, so people wouldn't even want to come to us because people don't want a doctor's note, a lot of them. So sure. We're now rec, unfortunately, though.
Yeah. So, in the past, the state has sort of said that, it's trying to move towards equitable representation in the industry for, underrepresented demographics, people of color, ex-cons, et cetera, to participate in this business. But with such high taxes, like, doesn't this, at the state and local level, like, how does this hinder the state's equity strategy for these underrepresented groups? And what should states or cities do to make it easier for people to actually participate in the business if they're serious about the legal market surviving? John?
They need to vet the applicants more, because most of these, people that are convicts or whatever, you can't make more than $18,000. So even, let's say you're making $40,000 a year, which is not much, you can't even get the license. You have to make less than 18. You're living in your car at that point, right? That's just not fair either. So they just need to vet the people better, and they should have local representation. So when these companies come in, they're people that care about the community. I totally agree with that, and I think scoring is the best way to go. Lotteries, anybody gets it. You can put in 50 lottery tickets if you're rich, so you get one.
So
That's not
scoring,
fair.
how would that work exactly?
Like Dave said, there's scoring. So one is that you're local, that you've owned a business locally, you know, and you have to meet all these requirements. The higher the score is the higher the application. So if there's 100 points and you're in the high 90s and you're number one because you live there, because you've had a business in Oceanside, instead of just it being money, because right now it's money, because I can hire a guy that has a felony and I can pay him to be my guy to get that social equity thing. But is it real? It's not real. It's fake. It's a workaround. So you're just creating all these workarounds that people are working around the system, you know?
So these larger entities are using equity as a sort of intentional strategy to enhance their consolidation over the industry through state law.
I've heard of people doing that. I've had people reach out to me and say, "Hey, can you be my social equity?" And I'm like, I make more than that, you know. So I've seen it happen, and I know that, you know, I don't know personally exactly what companies, but I know people reach out for that because it gives you a leg up, and it's already difficult enough to get in there.
Sure.
So,
Dave, do you have any opinions in terms of what the state's saying versus what the state's doing when it comes to equity and representation in the business?
Yeah, it's a tricky category for sure. Nobody's really understands it. Nobody's really sure how to approach it. There are a lot of questions. People are certainly a little more hands off when it comes to it, because now you're moving into racial divides and yeah, exactly. Who has been in prison? How long were you in prison? What was it for? There's just so many questions and tiptoeing around it that it's just not really being done properly. And there are no real guidelines for it. It's sort of more of a kind of a loose interpretation of what it needs to be. I mean, the state still hasn't gotten banking figured out yet, so I don't know why they're trying to venture into this prematurely. Yeah, it's just a little bit of a mess.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk about, I know we've talked about the black market at the beginning, but I think we need to give this some real time. So for people who are just unfamiliar with black market versus white market dynamics, I mean, can one of you sort of just like pencil out the actual economics, like the operations, so that people have an understanding of, you know, what are the economics of a marijuana business? Like why would the black market dominate the white market in the present scenario? You know, like what does it take to go through a license, that process, you know, the first year of operations, what's the tax responsibilities, operating expenses, so that people get like sort of the whole picture of why the black market is still thriving in the way that it does. John, do you want to?
well, I mean, you could make it real simple.
Yeah.
Let's say I live down the street from you and I steal electricity and I have 10 lights going. Okay, that's free, because a lot of black market people do stuff that's not legal anyway. So why not just steal the electricity anyway? Now I have, you know, 20 pounds of weed that cost me, you know, whatever my setup cost me over time, nothing really, and I can sell it for $1,000 a pound. That same pound is going to cost me about $4,000. There's no way to compete with that at all. And again, it doesn't have to be tested. There's no tax for it. And again, you could steal the electricity, which is what a lot of people do. And basically, they're making money out of nothing, because now I can't compete with them at all.
Yeah.
You know, it's $100 ounce. You're like, that's $4.50 in my store, and they're like, well, that's why I get it from. People tell me that all the time. I only come here to buy vapes and edibles because my guy down the street, it's $100 an ounce. Why would I buy that here? I hear it all the time.
Yeah. Dave, like, again, for somebody who's unfamiliar with the economics of this, like, what are some of the startup costs that people might not know about when it comes to, you know, a legal venture under the current tax and regulatory structure?
Yeah,
why does that make it difficult?
You're definitely into just starting up a cannabis dispensary. Just one dispensary is going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, the application process, it's twofold. You have to get locally licensed, and then you have to get state licensed. Just to get locally licensed is a whole. I mean, that'll cost you in Oceanside a little over $10,000. And weeks worth of time. Actually, it's more, because you've got to pay the safety and security plan people to come in and do all this for you, which is going to cost you another $10,000 per. And then the fees to go through the application process, you're up there between $10,000 and $15,000 just for that alone. You've got to pay rent on a building. You have to have an address. that's already been verified so that it meets the criteria. So you're paying you're paying a lease, which means you're also paying insurance. I mean, it's catastrophic at some point to where the black market, you don't have those issues. We don't have to have insurance. We don't have to pay taxes. We don't have to have a lease. It's night and day, really. So I can offer you twice as much as what John can, and for half the price. John's got to compete with what 13 other dispensaries in Vista. It's off the charts. It's too much. And Vista's not it's not a big place. It's very small. Categorically. So, one guy has a special, you have to have a special, or he's just going to wipe you out. So when it comes down to, running a black market, the black market has been in place since 1930. We've all been there. We've all done it. I've been consuming cannabis since I was 16 years old. So you always had the dealer or a friend, and you'd go to that guy. And now it's legal, but the taxes and the inconvenience and everything else that surrounds it, why am I going to stop going to my guy?
Yeah.
It makes no sense. It's convenient. I've been with them. It's consistent. You rarely have a problem.
Too.
It's cheaper, absolutely. I don't have to show ID. I don't have to go get a card. I don't have to get a recommendation. It's just, you threw all this in to everybody's lives and expected them to just change like that overnight. Isn't going to happen. And now you're not making it any easier because, oh, by the way, on top of the state taxes, you've got to have all of your local taxes to go with it. And again, just the inconvenience of needing a card or a recommendation or showing ID. And then everybody's afraid of being put into the state database because then they won't be able to get a gun. And it's one thing after another. And you're not going to change people overnight like that. It should have been more of a gradual.
Sure. So one thing I wanted to talk about is sort of like what's behind this. I mean, presumably state officials, local officials know the same information that we do here. So why, given the overwhelming evidence that the current regulatory and tax framework seems to be pushing people towards the black market, why do you think that the state is sort of seemingly letting the black market survive and even thrive as it would? John, do you have any, or either of you? They don't have the manpower.
Yeah, there's control.
There's a manpower issue. There's a money issue. With still over 70% of municipalities have bans in place, the state of California has hit zero milestones. So they don't have those millions and billions of dollars that they told you they were going to have coming in. Or at least the initiative did. It wasn't the state's initiative. It was Prop 64 was a voter initiative from outside groups. It wasn't the state. But the state says, oh, well, we're going to make all this money and it's going to trickle down into here and to here and to here. Well, it's not, because they're not making the money because, again, when you allowed the municipalities to make their own regulations, you have, again, over 70%. They still have bans in place. So nobody's applying for applications like they thought they would. And so there's no money for enforcement. The manpower isn't there. There's not much they can do.
Mm-hmm. You can't call the DCC. If you call the DCC, it's the information hotline for the state of California. So if I need something from the DCC, which used to be called the Bureau of Cannabis Control, now it's the DCC. They changed the name. It's through email with the specific person. Because if you call and you want to ask about this industry, it's the California hotline, and that's it. There's no information. There's not a book. They don't tell you how to do it. It's figure it out and fine you if you don't do it right.
Sure.
Pretty much.
So, I mean, like, in that sense, it sounds like there's just a sort of this dissonance between the realities on the ground and what state and local leaders are doing at the state and local level. So I wanted to talk about, like, if, let's say, state and local governments want to get serious about disincentivizing black market consumption, about incentivizing legal production, consumption, and sales of cannabis in Encinitas and Vista and Oceanside statewide. What are some strategies that we can implement? Like, what would disincentivizing the black market look like, or what would that even begin to look like? Like let's
Well,
have that conversation.
Incentivizing the white market, incentivizing the legal market. It's simple as that. Cut out a lot of that red tape that doesn't need to be there. Cut out a lot of those taxes that don't need to be there. That metric system, track and trace. I mean, that alone takes a full-time person every single day to enter all that information. It's ridiculous. You've made it so hard. You want to make it less hard and incentivize legality. That's pretty much all of it in a nutshell.
John?
It's pretty simple. I mean, especially at the start. I mean, maybe a 1% tax to start, but this 3, 4, 7%, it's just ridiculous. That's just way out of line.
Yeah, absolutely.
People don't like to pay taxes for cannabis because they haven't for the majority of their adult life. They haven't, and they're like, "What, taxes?" You're like, "Yeah."
Yeah, when you put a vote in front of them, they vote for it every single time, and then complain about it later. Wait a minute, why am I paying so much? Because you voted for it. What do you want from us? I mean, it makes no sense, but it's happening. It's happening right now in Encinitas.
I heard it in our store all the time. I'm voting for that. I'm like, but you already said it's too. Well, no, we want it. I'm like, no, you don't. Then you explain it to them, and they're like, oh no, it's already taxed really a lot. You're like, yeah, a lot. Too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do either of you happen to know, like, percentage-wise in California, the legal share, like, of the white market versus the black market, like what that looks like, how lopsided it is? Like, I thought I heard 70-30.
Yeah,
that's about right.
Yeah,
I was going to say it
huge.
used to be about 80-20. It's probably about 70-30 now.
It's huge. It's huge.
And I want to talk about. Well, I have a point to make there, but just with the new dispensaries opening up now in Encinitas, I mean, a lot of the feedback that I've been getting from people when I reached out to sort of people in my sphere before this interview was, people want to know with Encinitas having these businesses open for the first time, what will they be doing to ensure safety, security in their communities? What issues do these businesses have to be cognizant of now? From both your respective experiences, are these? I mean, as you said, the next mayor of Encinitas, Tony Kranz, who just recently got elected mayor, he's been quite outspoken about the safety concerns to do with these businesses, which he sort of grudgingly. He's sort of saying one thing like, I don't want this to happen, but this is happening regardless. But when it comes to legitimate concerns over public safety, like what can businesses be doing? What should businesses be cognizant of as they open up operations, if there are such legitimate concerns?
Well, a lot of people aren't familiar. There's been studies done dating back to 2011 from some large corporations and universities, including UCLA and UC Irvine, in connection to violent and property crime within a 2-mile radius of dispensaries, medical marijuana dispensaries. And it was proven that within a 2-mile radius, a dispensary will actually reduce violent crime and property crime significantly. And then once those dispensaries were closed, that crime came back within a matter of weeks. The reason for that was due to environmental impacts or protections such as lighting outside, signs, security guards, things to that effect. So, I mean, it's been about 3 or 4 studies by various organizations. In fact, I think one was the Rand Corporation as well, organizations and universities, and they all came back exactly the same, that dispensaries do reduce crime in an area when they're open, and when they were forced to shut down, the crime came back. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that alone tells you that dispensaries are not your crime-ridden. They don't bring crime. They actually prevent crime.
So that totally flips this public perception on its head, right?
It absolutely does. It's, people, unfortunately, like Tony Kranz, he doesn't know this information, so he goes right to, they're going to be awful, they're going to invite this, they're going to invite that. But again, he'll open his arms wide to a brewery or another bar in town. So it's always a little awkward.
Yeah. John, I feel like this relates back to the whole context of black market again versus white market of, when you make things legal and you make things safe and you make things controlled to a certain extent, you have I guess the argument would be that I'm hearing from Dave is that you have an opportunity to actually reduce some of those concerns around public safety versus in the black market where, safety issues do abound with sort of the unknown factors that come into play in those transactions. So can you kind of just speak to Dave's point? Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with Dave wholeheartedly, and I'll tell you the problem with marijuana and getting in children's hands is family. It's a family issue. That's where it comes from, and you're not going to ever control that because 80-90% of it is their uncle, their brother gives them weed when they're a kid. You're never going to stop that. If somebody's in my parking lot and they're going back and forth to the car, my security's like, "What are you doing? You can't do that." So if somebody's trying to they look underage, there's security there. They're carding everybody. They're making sure that you're supposed to be there, that you're in our system and all that. Black market's in an alley somewhere, you could be giving it to a kid. But again, you're never going to stop drugs or alcohol getting into kids' hands because it comes from the family, unfortunately. Probably 80% of it, easily.
Sure.
I mean, getting onto it by a family member. It is
Yeah.
what it is. Yep. I mean,
I just think it's an interesting notion. I want to look up some of those studies you mentioned afterwards that again, this perception of if you bring these places in, yes, it's going to generate revenue, but also do we have to be concerned about crime? Do we have to be concerned about public safety? And just sort of flipping out on its head, it's no, this is actually better for public safety. This is better for our community when it's in a controlled, safe, regulatory environment. And I just wonder about how, I know that you're involved in activism on this issue, and I believe you are as well, John. And I'm just curious, what your conversations are with people where you try to sort of educate them on the realities versus the myths and sort of how that conversation goes.
Oh, well, it usually falls on deaf ears. I
Yeah.
mean, you know how it goes. Once they've got their mindset, they are not changing it. That's for sure, especially when it comes to something like this. Cannabis is as old as the day is long. And you mostly have the educators and the people who work with children are the ones who really want to pound their chest and go at it, and they don't want to hear that it's safe or that it's I mean, how much cannabis can you smoke before you pass out? But I mean, I can have a few beers and pass out pretty easily. So yeah, I mean, again, it's usually trying to have this discussion with somebody who's anti-cannabis. Tends to not go very far. I mean, you could point out all the facts in the world, they don't want to hear it, and it just ends right there pretty much.
John, do you have any better luck educating people about this stuff, or not really?
It's it's been so stigmatized for so many years. It's hard to get people off of it. And if you've never tried it or you don't have any context of it, then to you it might be evil, to the next person. But who's to say that you can drink every day, you can smoke cannabis every day. What's worse? My doctors told me what's worse: drinking every day, period. And we let people drink every day, and we open up breweries and bars, and with very little regulation and very little taxes compared to this industry, it is much safer.
Yeah.
So hopefully, it'll come around. But again, it takes a lot of money to get into it. I had to stand in line, and I didn't have a lot of money. I got lucky, and I put a lot of work into it to get into it. I couldn't get one now. I tried in Encinitas. No way.
Yeah. But, I mean, do you feel like you're fighting an uphill battle? Do you feel like the cultural conversation in California around cannabis and around educating people about, what are the harms versus the benefits, pros and cons of making this industry, of supporting the white market? Do you feel like we are slowly but surely moving in the right direction on the issue of public perception, or do you feel like this is just an uphill battle?
No, as we've seen over the last few years, and I mean, 10 years ago, cannabis wasn't legal. It was still very gray market here in the state of California. I spent 13 years in Vegas, where the policy that were there was have a seed, go to jail. Now they've got dispensaries on the Strip. I mean, this is how far it's come in a fairly short amount of time. And why? Because the younger people are growing up. They are the ones who are unstigmatized by it. They're not as set in their ways as the older crowd who are now, we're seeing baby boomers are dying off. And it's the younger crowd that's coming up, and they're more accepting of it, and they're more understanding. They're users. It's really just a matter of time. I mean, it's come so far now. It's going to continue to progress.
Sure, John.
Yeah, I agree. It's getting better, but it just takes a lot of a lot of people like us just keep educating people, trying to educate people over and over, and hopefully some people will listen and they'll spread that with other people.
Yeah. Dave, I wanted to give you just a minute or two to talk about some of the activism you've been involved in recent years. I know I was talking with Amber about it off the record beforehand, but you've sort of ran 2 cannabis-related voter initiatives in Oceanside. You've focused on advancing cannabis-friendly political candidates where you can, and you've, as I said in the intro, you spearheaded efforts to bring cannabis regulations into Oceanside, and you've lobbied to bring dispensaries to the city. So can you tell me a bit more about your activism, just what you've been involved in, and why this is so important to you?
Well, you pretty much dialed it all in there. We still got a little ways to go in Oceanside. We still don't have dispensaries, and we're still working on that. And I have my group, Common Good LLC, which is a group of Oceanside community members, business owners. And, we're focusing at this point on getting dispensaries into Oceanside, and we want to focus on bringing one of those dispensaries and creating a community-owned and operated dispensary. We think it's a different business model, one that the community can embrace, can be a part of. We don't care who you are or what you do. If you would like to be involved in this, then by all means, come and be involved in it. You can work it. You can own a piece of it. We can all work together, but it's basically there to help the community. And I think that type of model is a one that will win eventually. I think it's better for the community, and I think all communities need models like that.
Sure.
And whether it's a cannabis or a bar or your local drugstore, or whatever the case may be, it's good to have something that the community can be behind and help thrive and advance. But yeah, we're still working hard in Oceanside, constantly lobbying council members and any politician we can get our hands on. Obviously, we'll have a little changeover on council come. Actually, this week.
And the better for you?
I think we've got a couple of good new candidates coming. So again, at this point, it's a numbers game. I need 3 out of 5.
Yeah.
I need 3 out of 5, and we haven't been able to make that happen yet to the extent that we wanted it to. Again, we do have some regulations in place now. We're not quite finished, and I can't be done until I'm finished.
Sure.
So we still got a little ways to go. Otherwise, we do speaking engagements. I've done cultivation seminars. Even at Maricosta College, I did a seminar with their horticulture club. So again, a lot of people are interested in it. They want to know more about it. And I'll talk about it all day long.
Sure. Well, I can tell just from talking to you that this is something you're very passionate about. I mean, you intend to fight this battle for the rest of your life, don't you?
Well, like I say, I think once we get dispensaries in Oceanside, I could possibly, back off a little bit and,
Sure.
kind of relax and move on to whoever else might need my help, should that ever be required. But everybody seems to be doing their own thing and doing it well. Again, we didn't see Encinitas getting very far, and look where they are today, and they've still got a ways to go as well. Limiting to 4 dispensaries. I mean, it's nice for the dispensary owner. You don't have that much competition. Certainly not like 14.
So yeah, John, I was just going to ask you. Dave was just talking a bit about the sort of current state of affairs that exists in Oceanside in terms of that there's been progress, but what he's pushing for right now, and especially with the sort of the new city council coming on. But what's the state of sort of state of local legislation and law in Vista look like? How is that affecting the growth or otherwise of the business?
Vista is actually talking about letting a 14th in because there's a lawsuit. Or not a 12th in because there's a lawsuit, believe it or not.
Dispensary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they're saying one of them bumped them out because it's a 600 feet setting there. So remains to see what the city of Vista does. I told them no. I mean, that's 11 is what the voter initiative is. I mean, deal with that on your own. You've got $5 million in your coffers. Do whatever you have to do. But no, not a 12th dispensary. There's 11 in Vista. And they based it on there being 110,000 people in Vista, and there's like 90 or something. So it's 1 per 10,000. Well, that doesn't even really cover 80% or 70% of the people coming are from out of town. Half of them from Oceanside.
Yeah.
Half of my people come from Oceanside.
Yeah.
At least. Or Carlsbad, because the other cannabis is Santa Ana or Torrey Holistics, or not, whatever that area is, Sorrento Valley, where there's 5 or 6, and that just happens to be one of them. But you got to go 45 minutes either direction.
Sure.
So, people come from San Clemente to us because of that. It's either Santa Ana or Oceanside. It's like, or Vista, So, and it's better traffic this way.
What's the feel you get from, and I know there's been a little bit of turnover now at the election, but John Franklin looks like he's going to be the next mayor. But do you have any opinions on sort of the current state, like how the current city council is sort of oriented in terms of, are they taking us in the right direction on the industry, or do you sort of feel like they're kind of in Encinitas, kind of still pushing back a bit against progress, or like what's your...
They like the money.
Yeah.
Now they're happy about it.
Yeah.
They spent millions of dollars combating these before when they were illegal. I don't know how, several million, I think. They, breaking them down and closing them. And now they've got all this extra money and they're happy to have it,
Yeah.
So
They just approved cultivation not too long
yeah,
ago.
they didn't want to do that because there's only so much industrial area. And so back to the whole commercial lease thing from earlier in the conversation, if you've never had a business, you don't rent a building for 1 year at a time like a home or an apartment. It's 5 years. Yeah. That's like the minimum lease you can get. If you can get a 3 year or something, tell them, hey, you work it out with them. But you got to sign up for a 5 year lease at $10,000 a month or whatever. That right there. Just think of that. 5 years you got to sign up for. And in the first year, you might not get it. And then you're going to have to pay whatever the difference is to get out of it. It's not like a home or an apartment again, like 1 year. It's 5 years. $10,000 a month, 5 years, do the math.
Yeah.
You got to have $500,000 sitting in an account just for that. And you can't even apply unless you have the building.
And that's just the lease. Don't forget the triple N
And
insurance.
yeah, and let's forbid that the owner doesn't own the building and you get licensed in there and the bank doesn't like cannabis because it's Schedule 1, they could pull it on you. So you have to find a building that's either paid off or the bank is friendly. And the banks, as we know, aren't really friendly. So it's like a needle in a haystack. It's like a unicorn to find a building that actually is going to get you all the setbacks, and the owner can actually rent it to you without any worry about the bank foreclosing on them or anything like that. Because if they do have a bank loan and you get a cannabis license in there, the bank will say, hey, you know what? It's time to pay your loan or find a new lender or get the cannabis people out of your building.
Yeah, they're usually FDIC insured,
you
and
just
that's
say, sorry.
federal, so they can't rent to you.
Yep.
So, this sort of circles back to earlier in the conversation, just the startup expenses, the overwhelming set of discouraging factors to entrepreneurs who are venturing into this industry at the local level. And I'm just curious, like, if we can sort of end on a more positive note, maybe are there maybe like other states that have done this before California, or maybe even other jurisdictions within California that are sort of tackling this the right way? Sort of incentivizing startup cannabis dispensaries, retail sellers. Is there anywhere where this has been like done effectively to where you guys would point to and say this is a model for how to encourage startup growth for mom and pop businesses? Colorado.
Colorado did it right.
It's probably one
I
of
mean,
the
Colorado.
What did they do?
Well, they came right out of the gate screaming. That's for sure. They were, I think, the first ones really to do the recreational cannabis. Again, no reports coming out of there saying, "Oh, dispensaries are being robbed and people are being killed." And they fought consumption lounges for a while, which was odd, and everybody's going, why is that? Why is that? And at some point, it just came down to, okay, well, look, visitors come into Colorado, they're shopping at the cannabis shops, they can't consume on the street, they can't consume in the hotel, they can't take it back on the plane. Well, what are we going to do? So, of course, consumption lounges came into play. Now they've got the full court press going in Colorado, and they seem to have done it right. They don't seem to have as much red tape and taxes and piled on BS that the state of California went in on. Out of all the states, I'd say Colorado did it right.
Yeah, I've seen statistics in Colorado where property values around the dispensary have gone up for the same reason, for safety, because you have all the security there now.
Yeah.
And you come into, and usually they let us into crappy areas.
Right.
So that's why you can actually measure the difference, because they let you, hey, this building's been run down for 20 years. Nobody wants to rent. Oh, you want to put cannabis in there? Let's let you in. Now you got security there. You're reinforcing everything, and you have a presence.
So you're saying is that like let's say there's like a single family residence in an area surrounded by dispensaries, that property value is more likely to go up than down.
I wouldn't say a single family home, but the properties, the commercial properties, because you can't take like a residence and a commercial and kind of do it that way. It's more
like a commercial structure in an area surrounded by cannabis dispensaries.
Look at Adelanto. Adelanto was bankrupt. They did a 1% tax and let everybody in. They've got plenty of money. And you could go up there and open a cannabis business tomorrow. Nobody wants to be in Adelanto. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's like 2.5, 3 hours from here. But they did a 1% flat tax. They're about to go bankrupt. Of course, they've had their issues. The mayor and stuff, and the FBI was involved, and there was some money taken that happened. But overall, it saved their city. That's why you see a lot of it in the deserts, because they're like retirement communities, and they have all this open land. What do we do with it? Let cannabis in and tax it,
Yeah. I mean, so you mentioned the consumption lounges. I mean, what else is Colorado doing that like we could realistically emulate? Like,
well, I mean, a lot of it. Again, I mean, one of the things that Colorado required, which was a good idea, was vertical integration. Mm-hmm. So if you had a dispensary, you needed to basically grow at least a certain percentage of your own product. So that being the case, now you were growing, you were distributing, and then you were dispensing. So this type of integration allows for more control of the product. To where California is looking at doing wine country stuff at this point, which I don't know how it's going to go over, but what is it called? What is it? Appellations, correct. Thank you. But yeah, they're looking at doing appellations. Appellations is basically, okay, in Napa County, you can only grow these types of grapes, which is nice because what they can do now is control, okay, so we had a bad batch of wine. Where did that come from? It's a lot easier to dial in. Okay, well, it was Napa Valley's, and it's this grower. He's growing those types of grapes. He's making that type of wine. So it's easier for them to dial in on where the problem might have been. I don't think Colorado's gone to that extent yet, but again, Colorado's pretty much full service, and finally got on board with consumption lounges. Again, I'm not seeing a whole lot of articles coming out where Colorado is falling and it's burning down and the cannabis is killing everybody. Yeah. To where Vista, just a few months ago, while they were talking about their allowing cultivation, consumption lounges was also proposed, and that was roundly shot down pretty quickly without much of a conversation, which is unfortunate. Everybody just thinks that you're going to get in your car and kill somebody. But no problem driving to a brewery or a bar. Yeah. So I don't know, very misplaced.
Well, it's interesting because California is, for all intents and purposes, a relatively left-leaning progressive state, and then it seems like on this particular issue, though, we're sort of behind the curve, as it were. So, what do you think is behind that? I mean, is it what's so unique about this issue that we're just not able to get on board with? We can sort of just turn to you. I mean, in terms of just the sort of the politics of this. I mean, as I talked about before, California is a relatively left-leaning progressive state, and it seems like on this particular issue, the tax and regulatory framework is not very friendly. It's not very progressive on the issue of dispensaries. So what do you think's behind that, and sort of what do you see as sort of the future of this moving forward?
Again, I think just it's been illegal for so long. There's been so much negative press on this that people are just still scared to touch it. And if you look at sales tax, I think a small tax is fair. 1 to 3%. I think 1% to start. But if you look at Vista's sales tax of 8.25%, they only get a 0.25%. Vista, the city itself. So I get why they want something to help, but they haven't had any real major issues, and when we call the police, they come, but they really can't help us because unless they steal more than $800 worth of stuff or whatever, they don't do anything at all. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty much worthless. Yeah, unfortunately.
And yeah, you're referring to Prop 47. Yeah. Yeah,
just like Walmart. If you push a cart out, it's less than 800, just let them go. Or whatever the numbers. There's a number for it. I don't know what it is, but I've called and I've had people take stuff, and I said, hey, and they're just like, there's nothing we can do about it, really.
Sure.
So.
I want to close by just we've talked about city, we've talked about state taxes, but there's also the county measure, Measure A, which looks right now as though it's going to pass in San Diego County, and just again kind of get some final thoughts on sort of again like how does this kind of reinforce this notion of we're sort of bleeding the white market dry and just reinforcing these monopolization consolidation dynamics. Dave, do you want to?
Yeah, no, you said it all. We're just bleeding the white market. We're just, we're making it very difficult to be in the space. And again, after all these years of putting cannabis users and consumption in prison, now we want to make as much money as we can off them and have them pay for everything. And a lot of these taxes basically just go into the general fund, which becomes a slush fund. I mean, they're not geared or meant to go to anything specific. So, it'll be determined at the time what they'll do with it. It's just, it's unsavory. And I think, again, with Prop 64 allowing that right from the beginning, it's just going to snowball and get worse. I mean, it's not going to get any better.
Sure. John?
You'll never get rid of the black market, unfortunately, especially when it comes to just straight flowers, because you can put a seed in the ground in your backyard, 20 plants, and grow 20 pounds, and all of a sudden you've got something of value. And you haven't had to pay the taxes on it. You haven't had to pay the licensing fees. I mean, you can sell for whatever you want. So you'll never get rid of it completely, but that's why the municipalities have to be very aggressive in how they approach this so that they stomp out enough of it to where the white market can thrive, which means starting out with like a 1% tax. I get it. They don't need more than that. They don't need more than 1%. Right now in the city of Vista, again, we were 3 years ago, we were in the negative $1 million. Now we have 4 or 5 million or something like that. And they were actually having a vote a year and a half ago about what they're going to do with the money all of a sudden. Educate people.
Sure.
Use it to educate people.
Well, hopefully that's kind of what we're doing here a little bit.
I hope so.
Educating people, because I think that, there's a lot of valuable insights coming from you two from the business perspective, but also even on the public safety perspective. Like, for instance, I didn't personally know that those studies had been done about, if you put a dispensary in an area that it's actually the violent crime around that specific dispensary is more likely to go down than up. And we also talked about, the property values as another point of interesting debate. So I think that this conversation has been extremely productive. And again, thanks to both of you for coming on. Again, we have John Jesse, who's the owner of DrGreenrx. It's a licensed dispensary in Vista. We have Dave Newman, who is the owner and controlling member of Common Good LLC in Oceanside. So thanks to both of you for coming on. I think I learned a lot, and hopefully our viewers do as well. So
absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Yep. Right. Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
This has been another episode of Stay Classy San Diego with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks again to our sponsors, MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com and Barntime Productions at barntimemusic.com. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in and viewing the show. We'll see you next time. Stay classy, San Diego.